Hey everybody, we're on day 35 of our Bible in a Year series. We're going through, excuse me, reading through the Christian Standard Bible. And today we are on Leviticus 10, 11, and 12. It's getting interesting. Again, I love the book of Leviticus. It is very, very underrated. It is something I think more people read through it. Like, don't do more than just this. There's so much to unpack in Leviticus, and I try to keep these videos around 20 25-ish minutes, and so there's a lot we can't unpack. I would highly suggest find someone that has a good teaching through Leviticus, or a commentary through the Word is a great one for your phone. You can pull it up and it goes a chapter at a time, so it reads you the chapter, and then it also has some commentary on that chapter, and it's a phenomenal resource. But we're reading through Leviticus. Bear with me, my voice is starting to go out. I got over the flu, and I don't know if I picked up something else or if I didn't actually get over it, but my throat is extremely sore. I have a cough drop and I've got some medicine, so I hope that doesn't mess up the audio too much. But I am going to try to push through, and yeah, we'll just jump right in. So, Leviticus 10, verse 1. Aaron's sons Nadab and Abihu each took his own fire pan, put fire in it, placed incense on it, and presented unauthorized fire before the Lord, which he had not commanded them to do. Then fire came down from the Lord and consumed them, and they died before the Lord. Moses said to Aaron, "This is what the Lord has spoken. I will demonstrate my holiness to those who are near me, and I will reveal my glory before all the people." And Aaron remained silent. With this, I think it is showing the importance of following what God has instructed us to do. So we don't get to see in here the intent necessarily of Nadab and Abihu, but we do see that they presented unauthorized fire before the Lord. So they're doing something that God had not commanded them to do. Right? They're going outside of what God's ordinance or rules or commands are. Now, because of that, and I think we can see some connections there. So instantly, what comes to my mind, there are some groups that are doing, maybe not currently doing, but they have done some not great stuff in the past. I think of I'll just say them. Bethel is one. There's been a lot of very, very sketchy stuff come out of Bethel, and it is done. Melissa Doherty recently did released a book, and she's done some interviews as well. I know with Remnant Radio and some others, but she does a really good kind of outline of this with New Thought and how they kind of try to hijack Christianity. But we've seen with Bethel things like Christian tarot cards and grave soaking and things like this that are not godly, but they are presented to be a I believe their exact words were they want to go into like New Age and take that stuff and claim it for God. But it's stuff that, some of it's stuff that we just weren't told to do. Some of it is stuff that we were expressly told not to do. Right? So this is what comes to mind when I read this is things like that, like doing things that we're not supposed to do and trying to say that it's for God and trying to do something ungodly in a way that honors God. Like, you can't. It's not possible. It'd be like blatantly sinning and doing and then trying to say that you're sinning on behalf of God. Like, that doesn't work. And honestly, it's a slap in the face, I think, to God. So, back to verse 4. Moses summoned Mishael and Elzaphan, sons of Aaron's uncle Uzziel, and said to them, "Come here and carry your relatives away from the front of the sanctuary to a place outside the camp, So they came forward and carried them in their tunics outside the camp, as Moses had said. Then Moses said to Aaron and his sons, Eleazar and Ithamar, do not let your hair hang loose, and do not tear your clothes, or else you will die, and the Lord will become angry with the whole community. However, your brothers, the whole house of Israel, may weep over the fire in the Lord that the Lord caused. You must not go outside the entrance to the tent of meeting, or you will die, for the Lord's anointing oil is on you. So they did as Moses said. Now this, not let your hair hang loose and not tear your clothes, that is specifically talking about mourning. And I'm not entirely sure why they're told not to mourn over this, and unless it's just because, I mean, it is God's fire coming down and kind of cleansing what was bad. But that is what's being talked about here. And Moses says, your brothers, the whole house of Israel, may weep. So he's given permission for others to weep and mourn the death here, but not for Aaron and his sons, which is interesting. Verse 8, the Lord spoke to Aaron, you and your sons are not to drink wine or beer when you enter the tent of meeting, or else you will die. This is a permanent statute throughout your generations. You must distinguish between the holy and the common, and the clean and the unclean, and teach the Israelites all the statutes that the Lord has given to them through Moses. Moses spoke to Aaron and his remaining sons, Eleazar and Ithamar, take the grain offering that is left over the food offerings to the Lord and eat it. Prepare without yeast beside the altar, because it is especially holy. You must eat it in a holy place, because it is your portion. And your sons from the food offerings to the Lord, for this is what I commanded. But you and your sons and your daughters may eat the breast of the presentation offering and the thigh of the contribution in any ceremonially clean place, because these portions have been assigned to you and your children from the Israelites' fellowship sacrifices. They are to bring the thigh of the contribution and the breast of the presentation offering together with the food offerings of the fat portions to present as a presentation offering before the Lord. It will belong permanently to you and your children, as the Lord commanded. Then Moses inquired carefully about the male goat of the sin offering, but it had already been burned up. He was angry with Eleazar and Ithamar, Aaron's surviving sons, and asked, why didn't you eat the sin offering in the sanctuary area? For it is especially holy, and he has assigned it to you to take away the guilt of the community and make atonement for them before the Lord. Since its blood was not brought inside the sanctuary, you should have eaten it in the sanctuary area as I commanded. But Aaron replied to Moses, see, today they presented their sin offering and their burnt offering before the Lord. Since these things have happened to me, if I had eaten the sin offering today, would it have been acceptable in the Lord's sight? When Moses heard this, it was acceptable to him. Chapter 11. The Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, tell the Israelites, you may eat all these kinds of land animals. You may eat any animal with divided hooves and that chews the cud, but among the ones that chew the cud or have divided hooves, you are not to eat these. Camels, though they chew the cud, do not have divided hooves. They are unclean for you. Hyraxes? Don't know what that is, actually. Though they chew the cud, do not have hooves. They are unclean for you. Hares, though they chew the cud, do not have hooves. They are unclean for you. Pigs, though they have divided hooves, do not chew the cud. They are unclean for you. Do not eat any of their meat or touch their carcasses. They are unclean for you. This is what you may eat from all that is in the water. You may eat everything in the water that has fins and scales, whether in the seas or streams, but these are to be abhorrent to you. Everything in the seas or streams that does not have fins or scales among all the swarming things and other living creatures in the water, they are to remain abhorrent to you. You must not eat any of their meat. You must abhor their carcasses. Everything in the water that does not have fins and scales will be abhorrent to you. abhorrent. I don't know how to say that word. I'm probably mispronouncing it. Yeah, I don't know. My wife's an English major. I'll ask her. You are to abhor these birds. They must not be eaten because they are abhorrent. Eagles, bearded vultures, Egyptian vultures, kites, any kind of falcon, any kind of raven, ostriches, short-eared owls, gulls, any kind of hawk, little owls, cormorants, long-eared owls, barn owls, eagle owls, ospreys, storks, and any kind of heron, hoopoes, and bats. All winged insects that walk on all fours are to be abhorrent to you, but you may eat these kinds of all the winged insects that walk on all fours, those that have jointed legs above their feet for hopping on the ground. You may eat these, any kind of locust, katydid, cricket, and grasshopper. All other winged insects that have 4 feet are to be abhorrent to you. Okay, before we go on, I want to touch real quick maybe some of the reason for this, because if you're not, if you're reading this on the outside, and we know later on that all these unclean animals are made clean in Acts, when Peter is he's on a roof praying, and he has this vision where he I'm blanking. Sorry. So like the scroll or the sheet unfolds, not a scroll. The sheet like rolls out in front of him. There's all these unclean animals, and he's hungry, and he hears this voice that says, "Kill and eat," and he says, "I can't. I've never eaten anything unclean." It says, "Kill and eat," and it says it again, "Kill and eat." He says it again, and then the voice says, "Do not call unclean what I have made clean." Now, this is kind of dual. This is talking about, because shortly after that he goes to the Gentiles. This is talking about the Gentiles, and this is also talking about food restrictions, okay? So, why is it that this restriction is here at this point in time, but it does not go on past into the new covenant? So, I think there are a couple reasons. One, I think there is a health thing. So I think there are some animals, like if you look at like pork, it can be, undercooking, really anything can be detrimental to you, but pork has some incredibly nasty effects possible if you eat it undercooked or uncooked, right? So I do think that there is some of that at play. I also think there is an element of keeping Israel separated from other nations. So as Israel is going in to the areas where these other nations are that are worshiping these pagan gods, you'll see many times they will you will see that Israel can eat sheep. Right, they can eat lamb, but the nation that they're going in with, they eat primarily like pork or pig, and so it's a lot easier for think of if you were to have a neighbor that comes over and it says, "Hey, let's say you're a vegetarian, you don't eat any meat at all," and your neighbor comes over and says, "Hey, I want to have you guys over for dinner, and it's going to be full just barbecue. We're going to have burgers, we're going to have steaks, we're going to have pork chops, we're going to have kebabs with like lamb and all this stuff, and everything's just going to be meat." It's a lot easier for you to just say no, because you're not going to be able to actually eat anything that's there. Now, these are not the only reasons. I think there's several, but just two to kind of touch on to maybe kind of bring you into a little bit of understanding of some of the particular reasons for this. Again, I would highly suggest anyone that wants to get into this and really learn more about this, which I think everybody should, get a good commentary or something like that, and they'll go over some more of these specifics here. Okay, verse 24. These will make you unclean. Whoever touches their carcasses will be unclean until evening. And whoever carries any of their carcasses is to wash his clothes and will be unclean until evening. All animals that have hooves but do not have a divided hoof and do not chew the cud are unclean for you. Whoever touches them becomes unclean. All the four-footed animals that walk on their paws are unclean for you. Whoever touches their carcass will be unclean until evening, and anyone who carries their carcasses is to wash his clothes and will be unclean until evening. They are unclean for you. These creatures that swarm on the ground are unclean for you. Weasels, mice, any kind of large lizard, geckos, monitor lizards, common lizards, skinks, and chameleons. These are unclean for you among all the swarming creatures. Whoever touches them when they are dead will be unclean until evening. When any of them dies and falls on anything, it becomes unclean. Any item of wood, clothing, leather, sackcloth, or any implement you use for work, it is to be rinsed with water and will remain unclean until evening. Then it will be clean. If any of them falls into any clay pot, everything in it will become unclean. You are to break it. Any edible food coming into contact with that unclean water will become unclean, and any drinkable liquid in any container will become unclean. Anything one of their carcasses falls on will become unclean. If it is an oven or stove, it is to be smashed. It is unclean and will remain unclean for you. A spring or cistern containing water will remain clean, but someone who touches the carcass in it will become unclean. If one of their carcasses falls on any seed that is to be sown, it is clean. But if the water has been put on the seed and one of their carcasses falls on it, it is unclean for you. If one of the animals that you use for food dies, anyone who touches its carcass will be unclean until evening. Anyone who eats some of its carcass is to wash his clothes and will be unclean until evening. Anyone who carries its carcass must wash his clothes and will be unclean until evening. All the creatures that swarm on the earth are abhorrent. They must be eaten. Do not eat any of the creatures that swarm on the earth, anything that moves on its belly or walks on all fours or on many feet, for they are abhorrent. Do not become contaminated by any creature that swarms. Do not become unclean or defiled by them, for I am the Lord your God. So you must consecrate yourselves and be holy, because I am holy. Do not defile yourselves by any swarming creature that crawls on the ground, for I am the Lord who brought you up from the land of Egypt to be your God. So you must be holy, because I am holy. This is a law concerning animals, birds, all living creatures that move on the water, and all creatures that swarm on the ground, in order to distinguish between the unclean and the clean, between the animals that may be eaten and those that may not be eaten. The Lord spoke to Moses, "Tell the Israelites, when a woman becomes pregnant and gives birth to a male child, she will be unclean 7 days, as she is during the days of her menstrual impurity. The flesh of the foreskin must be circumcised on the 8th day. She will continue in purification from her bleeding for 13 days. She must not touch any holy thing or go into the sanctuary until completing her days of purification. But if she gives birth to a female child, she will be unclean for 2 weeks, as she is during her menstrual impurity. She will continue in purification from her bleeding for 66 days. When her days of purification are complete, whether for a son or a daughter, she is to bring the priest at the entrance of the tent of meeting a year-old male lamb for a burnt offering, and a young pigeon or a turtle dove for a sin offering. He will present them before the Lord and make atonement on her behalf. She will be unclean from her discharge of blood. This is the law for a woman giving birth, whether a male or a female. But if she doesn't have sufficient means for a sheep, she may take 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, one for a burnt offering and the other for a sin offering. Then the priest will make atonement on her behalf, and she will be clean." Okay, that is it for today, as far as the reading goes. So what we see in Leviticus, there's a lot of stuff like this. We'll see eventually, it's coming up here in a couple chapters. It talks about like inspecting houses and seeing mold and stuff. And basically they're told that like if it's a certain type of mold, then you make this concoction of these things and you can scrub it clean. But if it's a certain type of mold, then you just basically have to burn the house down. And it kind of goes to a lot of practical stuff. It seems like some of it is like the concoction they're told to make is basically a cleaner. Um, Obviously not chemicals and stuff like that like we have today, but it's a natural type of cleaner. And it's really crazy. Even I'll give this one last point, and then we will we can move on to the questions. But I've seen a study before. I was going to pull it up, but it's going to take a while, I think, to find it. I've seen a study before talking about circumcision, and women that have a partner who is circumcised are like 40% less likely to get cervical cancer or something like that. And it's like it's crazy. Like, you wouldn't think that that is the case, but it's like the laws that God gave the Israelites. A lot of them have a lot of very practical application or very practical benefits, and it's like stuff that as humans we really wouldn't know until now when we're able to actually look at some of the stuff. But it's crazy, like, seeing some of that. But yeah, we will dive into the questions now. So question 1: what lessons can we learn from the consequences faced by Nadab and Abihu regarding the seriousness of approaching God with reverence? I kind of touched on this a little bit during. I've noticed. I need to read ahead the questions, but I've kind of touched on this a little bit during the whole reading. But the idea that they're doing things outside of what God wanted to be done, outside of the order God wanted it to be done, and so there is an element of that where it's if God has given us instruction, we need to follow the instruction, and that ties into reverence. You know, if you are irreverent towards God, you're not going to care what He says or how He says to do things or the proper design for things or how things are supposed to go. If you have that reverence, you're going to respect what He says. You're going to honor what He says and want to do it the way in which He instructs us to do it. So I think that is outlined perfectly there. Question 2: how do the laws of purity in these chapters inform our understanding of physical and spiritual cleanliness in our own lives? So it is a little bit different for us. We have the sacrifice that was already made from Jesus, and that was made to cover a multitude of sins, past, present, and future. And I think we can still take something from this, though, and a lot of it is like seeing the seriousness that goes into this, and how I still think we should be actively trying to live a life that is spiritually clean. Now, there aren't. There are still things that we can do that are sinful, but we don't have the element of. To an extent, we don't have the element of clean and unclean like they did in Israel. It's different for us, but I think it's still it shows the importance of trying to live a life that is spiritually clean, if you will. Question 3: in what ways can we strive for holiness in our daily actions and decisions, reflecting the principles found in these chapters? This kind of builds on the last one. I think not all of these rules and laws apply to us today. I think there is a separation. Typically, so you'll hear people talk about like ritual laws, moral laws, and social laws, and there's nothing like clear cut of that in Scripture. That's kind of groupings that we have given to them. I'm not completely against those. I think that can be a helpful way to look at it. But I think a better way to approach this is if there are things that are given the punishment of death in the Old Testament, then I think those are things that we still need to see today. We need to view those things as sinful today, because you can see the seriousness that's there. So I do think it's good to kind of look through and see some of these laws and rules, and if nothing else, like, it just kind of shows you how God was preparing ahead and things like that for a lot of these. So yeah, that is it for today. Appreciate everyone watching, listening. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, all that fun stuff. Spread the word. The best way that podcasts spread is through word of mouth. So if this has been a blessing to you, feel free to pass that on to somebody else that you think it'll bless as well. Thanks for all of it, for the support. I'm still seeing some positive feedback, people getting stuff out of this, and that's always encouraging to see. So appreciate it. Thanks for watching, listening. God bless.